Live from the room of Mira Studio, you're listening to Foster Brothers on Point. Turn your selector switch to the fire position. The show is now live. I'm Hayes Foster. My brother Stephen Foster is here. We're your hosts for the radio show tonight. Tonight we're just going to do a general coverage of the news going on in the world. We don't want to limit ourselves to one topic because there is a lot of things going on both domestically here in the U.S. and globally.
That's right, Hayes. Today is March 13th, 2014, broadcasting live from Nashville, Tennessee. We're going to touch on some subjects that we all think are important. Definitely some interesting times we live in. You know, you definitely can't say this world's boring.
No, and I believe all of us that are alive right now on the planet definitely have a purpose. Just to give you a preview, we devoted an entire show last week to the Connecticut gun registration rebellion in Connecticut. So obviously things, develop every day with that, and we have a situation now where there's, well, you know what? I'm just going to read it to you. It'd be easier to do it that way. And this is from the freedomoutpost.com if you wanted to look up the story itself specifically. And I'm just going to read this to you. There have been reports that Navy veteran John Kniek has been receiving threats because of his stance on the issue of Connecticut's gun registration law. Apparently those reports are due to a misreading of a piece by the New Haven Registry in which Kniek said, "There have been threats made that I have found out about today," end quote. Freedom Outpost reached out to John Kniek, who spoke with us this morning and confirmed that the threats he was speaking about were towards the Bransford police, not towards him. The cops, this is a quote, "The cops are having the threats. They're scared," end quote, he told us. According to Kniek, Officer Joseph Peterson, who made comments in interaction on Facebook while off duty, that he would, and this is a quote from Officer Joseph Peterson, "give my left nut to bang down your door and come for your gun," end quote. 24-hour security has been placed on Mr. Peterson's residence and himself due to the threats on his life. This information came directly from the police chief, Kevin Holloran. Mr. Kniek told us that he had 2.5 hour sit down with the Bransford Police Department on Tuesday. He said that the Branford PD was supposed to come out with an apology for Peterson's comments, and wanted Kniek's endorsement of the apology in an attempt to cool things down. The first words out of the police chief's mouth were, "How can you help us with this?" Kniek said. "They're getting killed over there. They said they can do nothing but deal with this." Kniek's endorsement would not be automatic. Quote, "There are some things here that need to be addressed before I endorse the apology," end quote, he said. "Don't make any apology to me. The apology has to be to the residents of Branford and to the citizens of the state of Connecticut," end quote. "If we are to tamp this thing down, none of us need violence here," end quote, Kniek continued. "We're winning this thing. We're winning this thing hard in here," Kniek said, referring to the efforts to ignore unconstitutional and unlawful legislation that seeks to have citizens register their semi-automatic rifles and high-capacity magazines. "That's the last thing we need," he added, referring to violence. And so what's going on here is you had Officer Joseph Peterson, who is on the, Branford Police Department in Connecticut, and he got on Facebook and made the comment I read you earlier about how he's ready to kick in doors and confiscate firearms from citizens. And Kniek was sourced to try to, he's a Navy veteran, Kniek, and the police department approached him to try to publicly, calm this situation down. So here's another quote from Knick. "We're going to try to throw water on this thing and let it get calmed down," Knick said. "The whole premise of where Joe's coming from has to be addressed, and now it has been. Now it's time to calm it down. The problem is, now we have a forest fire burning, and we've got to see how we can go about extinguishing it." John Knick stressed that the threats and violence on both sides is not what will win the day. None of us want violence anyway. Knick also pointed out that no ex post facto laws or retainers can be instituted, and that doesn't apply just to guns. For his part, Knick said there would have to be several things in the apology before he would endorse it. One of those things would be remedial training in the United States Constitution for Officer Joseph Peterson and the other officers of the Branford Police Department. Another would be a stand that police department would not be involved in the enforcement of the gun registration law. Branford Police, as scheduled to contact John Knick today, at the time of the writing of this article, they have not done so. The purpose of the contact, according to Mr. Knick, is to get his approval of their apology, which they will seek to have broadcast via television, with Mr. Knick leading his approval to the apology. While Mr. Knick has been thrown into a whirlwind of news publicity in the last week, he is confident that cooler heads will prevail and wants to be part of the solution, not of the problem. That solution is to have constitutionally educated law enforcement officers who also understand the history of gun registration, confiscation, and a citizenry who elects lawmakers who understand the same. So I know that was long-winded, but that was the update from what's going on in Connecticut right now.
So just to clarify, what we have is we have Mr. Knick, which he's a firefighter or former firefighter.
No, well, that, and he's a Navy veteran also.
Navy veteran, and on Facebook is where some of his friends, some of his old friends, in particular Joseph Peterson, who is currently a Branford police officer, had made some comments. So, an ex-firefighter and a police officer exchanging words on Facebook, and John Knick, kind of a patriot, standing up for his Second Amendment, and a police officer, basically saying, "I can't wait for the day where I can raid your house." And, you can only imagine what it's going to be like. You got a Second Amendment defender withholding his ground or holding up his ground, and you got a boot-licking thug kicking in the door with the, full auto. It's probably going to be some killing going on.
Yeah, and Mr. Knick in this situation is probably putting, it's probably awkward for him because, who doesn't support our police and firefighters? But how can, he support being a veteran himself and a firefighter? How can he support the violation of the law of the land, the Constitution of the United States? How can someone endorse the violation of the Second Amendment specifically, as far as confiscating weapons from law-abiding citizens until the governor of the state signed his signature on an illegal piece of legislation? That's a tough spot to be in for anybody.
You know what the unfortunate reality is, and you touched on it on the story where, the ex-firefighter was basically saying, "I want a re-education or I want a clarification among the police officers and maybe all the city staff on the Constitution, maybe even just the basics." I think is what he was hinting at. That I used to work in government. I worked in local government around the Nashville area. I can tell you firsthand, and in particular with the police department, they didn't really understand, the Constitution. They didn't understand the broad swaths of what the Constitution covered. They knew their general policies. They knew what they were going to do on a DUI stop. They knew, about speeding. They knew basic law. They had no idea about, kind of your rights and where that line was drawn. They weren't even interested in it. It was a paycheck for them. I'm assuming that, this guy that wants to kick in a door, he's thinking, I play Call of Duty every night, and I'm into violence. Until he gets return fire, he might think twice.
Yeah, and it's easy, being someone in law enforcement. I'm not personally, but I have friends who have been in the past, and it can be easy to ignore the Constitution if you haven't studied it. And I think there should be a very close examination of the Constitution and Bill of Rights to any law enforcement officer, whether that's on the federal, state, or local level. And anybody who's itching to kick a door in, like Tubbs just said, I don't think that's really a good thing because, well, like you said, it's all fun until someone starts shooting back, and then that's when the reality sets in.
That's right, Hayes. And this subject's gonna be ongoing. We'll keep covering it. Clearly, this is very resemblant of early stages of the American Revolution. Even similar to the Civil War. So we're keeping an eye on it. It's very touchy situation, and the mainstream media is not covering it. This is probably the number one story in the United States right now.
Yeah, and you're not getting a lot of main media coverage of this story. And now we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Foster Brothers on Point would like to thank My One Supply for making this show possible. MyOneSupply.com, suppliers of fine firearm and tactical gear. MyOneSupply.com carries Magpul, Eberly Stock, Trigicon, EOTech, and many more top-shelf brands. MyOneSupply.com offers genuine military surplus and survival items. From the battlefield to your front door, check out MyOneSupply.com.
Thank you, Hayes. Next subject we're going to touch on is this electrical grid situation where we've had some attacks on the electrical grid, in particular in California, where a sniper team took out transformers. Slightly suppressed by the mainstream media. We've covered it already. There's reports of other attacks on the grid, in particular in Tennessee. Some gunmen approached a TVA power plant in East Tennessee, and there was gunfire exchange. We don't know what they were going to do if the TVA security didn't stop that, and give props to TVA security for that. But there's at least 2 reported, and you have to imagine the ones that don't get reported.
Yeah, and when you think of an electrical grid interruption, what comes to people's mind, in the forefront is usually an EMP, or electrical magnetic pulse, by nuclear device detonating in the upper atmosphere, and that could shut down, a lot of the affected power grid underneath it. What we're talking about is there has been attacks, low-tech attacks. We're talking with 30 caliber rifles. We're talking about just an AK-47 round, 7.62 by 39, that happened. Let's see, when was it? It was last year, San Jose, California. Unknown subject fired multiple shots in an electrical transmission station, damaging several transformers. Authorities subsequently discovered intentionally cut fiber optic cables in a manhole. No motive or suspects have been identified. And I think we covered that on a previous show. But, these guys, they went out, they scouted the location, they put mounds of rocks like a regular, trained sniper team would do to show the location to when other shooters possibly showed up where to fire from. So this was pre-planned, premeditated.
That's right. With the 17 transformers going out, there was a potential blackout scenario. The reports from internal sources said that operators were scrambling just to avoid the blackout in California, in which, when a blackout occurs, the hard part is getting it back online. And they were probably pretty close to succeeding, on a blackout scenario around the LA area. Thank God that didn't happen.
Yeah, and you had 2 other instances of low-tech attack on the power grid, one in Tucson, Arizona, the other in Jacksonville, Arkansas. And what these guys did, or gals did is they loosened some of the bolts on the transmission towers themselves, and I guess they were hoping maybe high winds could possibly cause the tower to fall, and that would cause the interruption. So this is, this is pretty low tech stuff they're doing. There's nothing, besides procuring the right, tools to loosen the bolts. We're not talking about anything high tech here.
That's right, and this is the power grid is probably the most likely attack we'll receive. Whether or not we've really got Russia mad, or if they want to strike first, any sort of first strike scenario. If it's not a war scenario, will be internal insurgents, and it'll probably be against the power grid. So, if you have any way of providing electrical backup for your home or wherever you're at, or if you have a bug out location, solar would be a great option because it's clearly going to be one of their targets.
Now, what's interesting is New Jersey, in particular, has incurred a lot of these low-tech attacks recently. Actually, 2014, some dating back to 2013. One from the 26th of January 2014. Employees found a hole approximately 3 foot wide by 2 foot wide in the perimeter fence of an electrical switching and substation in East Rutherford. On the 22nd of January, they identified a subject entering the Burlington generating station using false ID. The subject claimed he had a gun and a bomb. Neither one were found. And so what a lot of people are thinking, are these dry runs? We've seen in the past some of the terrorists when they'll try to get through a TSA checkpoint, and they'll try to bring certain things that would bring a red flag. So could we be looking at a trial run? I don't know, just something to definitely keep an eye on out there.
That's right. Keep that one on your radar. Like we said, we're trying to cover the top 4 stories for March 13th, 2014. Moving right along, Flight 370. That's one that's has not been discovered yet. We don't know where this plane is right now. In a few weeks we may have discovered this, but it's a big mystery right now.
Yeah, and the Malaysian Flight 370. What's odd is I think it plays into a lot of the human psyche, and specifically the psychology, because who hadn't been boarding an airplane and you're sitting there buckling in, and you're about to take off, you hear the turbines spooling up, and you're thinking, wow, my life is not in my own hands, and I really hope that pilot is competent. So that's something I think that's just kind of it's odd that they haven't found the wreckage of this plane, or no one knows if it was hijacked, what happened. So it just kind of burns in the psyche, I believe, of people worldwide, and that's why we're going to cover that.
Well, earlier this week, the Chinese, brought to attention they thought they found something on satellite imagery. After checking it, there was nothing there. As of today, on the 13th, the latest news is that there's been a release that there's a Rolls-Royce engine company that manufactures the engines for this particular aircraft. They've installed data monitors, which means it sends off a wireless signal back to Rolls-Royce to monitor the engine performance. It's something they've integrated for whatever reason, probably for performance issues or QA/QC issues. And what's interesting is they said that the engines were running for 5 hours after it left the radar. So that brings up a big question. If those engines were running, that it clearly wasn't in the ocean, because they don't run in water.
Yeah, so we could be dealing with hijacking and landing in a different location. We just don't know. I heard earlier on the news earlier this week that the GPS tracking, that monitors the location of commercial flights that's installed, had been disconnected, and they said that could be done manually by the pilots. And that brought up a question to me. What would be the purpose of disconnecting the GPS tracker? It just seems like it would, if it was me, I would say put the GPS tracker in the tail fin where nobody can get to it, just simply because that way there can't be any manual tampering of it. I just thought that was odd also.
That they could even tamper with it. So with the new information, with the turbines running for 5 hours afterwards, they put a proximity where it could have flown, and Middle East was one of the areas it could have been flown to. Doesn't mean that's where it went to. But so it looks really like it's been hijacked to me. Another thing that I'm thinking about is if Rolls-Royce is tracking engine performance, they're most likely checking the GPS location. There's probably a good chance some government agency knows exactly where those planes are right now, which could bring up, potential false flag in the future, or they might be waiting to see what they're going to do with it. I mean, this is somewhat unprecedented.
And, one of the other things that came out on the news is satellite imagery did not detect a high altitude explosion. So that kind of excludes the mid-air explosion and, the smaller debris, which would be harder to detect in when you're searching for the craft. Now, that was a Boeing 777, which is that's a large, aircraft. So it just seems odd that something like that could disappear. Stephen?
And the other thing, the Malaysian military reported, the altitude was at 29,500 feet. And, this kind of conflicts with eyewitness accounts from some fishermen that reported a large aircraft at a much lower altitude, maybe even at 3,000 feet, which, that would tell you that they're probably trying to stay under the radar. That's exactly how you avoid the radar, is you get below a certain altitude and you avoid the radar by that. So, there's a lot of weird stuff happening here. It's looking to me like it was at least hijacked. Whether or not it safely landed at airport, or if this is a false flag, if this is some sort of government operation, I would lean towards, there's some high powers, government at least, maybe cartel level operating, because you can't pull off a large operation like this if you're operating out of a cave, I mean.
Yeah, and speculation has been all over the place. I'd even heard at some sources, since we've been there's been a lot of meteor sightings lately, that possibly it was hit by a meteor. But I want to keep moving on because we do have another very sobering story. The Ukraine situation has been deteriorating. What we're looking at is the latest I've read. John Kerry has put out an ultimatum to Russia to reverse course in the Ukraine. I don't know if that means they need to withdraw their missile batteries, their tank battalions, and their troops in general from the border of Ukraine. I'm really not sure. I didn't read what the specifics were. However, the situation has deteriorated. A lot of people are saying, is this something that could possibly lead us into a world war?
The Cold War supposedly ended, with Reagan, but you have to admit, even modern day films still depict Russia as one of our major enemies. And for me, growing up in America, in the U.S. city, I was aware of the Russia phenomenon, but I've never viewed them as an enemy. I think that they're, a lot more progressive than they were, in the 70s and 80s. But let's face it, there's still tension there. It seems to me like Putin and Obama, they're doing a little bit of a dance here. It's kind of a super high-risk Russian roulette they're playing, and I don't like the looks of it because both of them are very powerful men. I don't see Obama backing down, and I don't see Putin backing down either.
Yeah, you have Putin being former, KGB himself. in intelligence. He probably knows exactly what's going on in Ukraine, as Obama is privy to that information also. And we know that what we've been watching, we watched with the Arab Spring, in Egypt, Syria, Libya. A lot of those revolutions were Western backed or pushed forward by Western powers. Like the CIA. So, if that happened in the Ukraine, Putin is very well aware of that information.
That's right. And with 25,000 troops in the Crimea area or in Crimea, it's, the invasion's basically already occurred. There hasn't really been much of a armed conflict that's occurred yet, but we're at the cusp with these politics and the ultimatums. It just gets more dicier. This is a big one to follow too, because this is probably the most likely scenario for a World War III outcome, and big one to keep on your radar.
Yeah, and our generation has not experienced a world war, and as they do not want to experience a world war, I'm sure. And it's just a shame. Usually in the past, these superpowers such as the U.S., Russia, have fought, through proxy countries, Vietnam, so a direct conflict could be a thermonuclear exchange, and nobody wants that anywhere on this earth.
Speaking of the proxy wars, Hayes, modern day, the U.S. does fight proxy wars. For example, anywhere in the Middle East has more or less been leveraging or manipulating systems. For example, in Crimea, what's at stake here? Well, apparently, NATO and the EU are interested in the gas lines, where Russia already has a stronghold on that. And if Russia loses that to the EU, they would become dependent on the natural gas of the EU, and that, affects the sovereignty of Russia, honestly.
It affects the power, and because let's face it, having access to resources in this modern age is definitely power. I won't say any different, because we all know that's true. It just seems like things have escalated to a point where Russia is waiting for the U.S. to blink, and the U.S. is waiting for Russia to blink, and nobody's backing down. And that should make everybody nervous.
And to be quite frank, I'm getting sick of it. These politicians need to just ease up and, relax for a moment. They're trying to cause World War III here, and I'm getting sick of it.
Yeah, I think it's okay to get really, ticked off over this, because, I haven't seen much representation from Congress or the President of the United States in a long time, and that includes Bush too.
All of them are up there, they're playing their little politics games, and they're trying to hook up their friends and line in their pockets, but they're about to put everyone's neck on the line with a potential World War III, and I'm honestly tired of it. And, people need to start hitting the streets on this one, because, if we end up in World War III because Obama's playing chicken with Putin, it just sucks.
Yeah, I can't even believe, this. It almost seems surreal, in all honesty.
Well, they're leading us down this path, and, everyone's, acting like nothing's happening.
Yeah. I'd like to say it's going to turn out well. I really don't know. I think the best thing, obviously, for the citizens of the United States is prayer. We really need to pray hard about this. And like Stephen said, maybe hit the streets with some signs and say, you know what? It's not all fun and games, because if a nuclear exchange happens, the way that we've lived our life for a long time is going to be over with.
That's right. And, we're going to wrap up our show for this March 13th, 2014. Just pay attention to the news, because the mainstream media does not cover these topics with the importance that they really are.
And thank you for listening to Foster Brothers on Point.
Last night I heard this politician talking about his brand new mission. Liked his plans, but they came undone when it got around to guiding guns. so you'd understand just a little bit more about the working man. God and guns keep us strong. That's what